Hey, this is Tom. It's time for another installment of Sculpting Archives. This time we go back to the year 2008, so enjoy part one. "2008 kicks off with another Dead General Society miniature, the Rattlin female knight. So as you can see, I was continuing to do faces in Procreate, and I think it might have even been more than the fact that I was liking Procreate. It was the idea that I had seen a lot of other sculptors, they just did faces in different material, and I'm like, well, this is my thing. I know I can do faces. Faces are in this material, and everything else is in this material, because it really didn't make much sense why I was still doing the entire sculpt essentially out of green stuff when I obviously wasn't super thrilled about the material still. But this figure turned out really well. It was another female, but in this case she was heavily armored, so you didn't really see a lot of the features that you normally would have to deal with, and trying to get those really perfect elegant curves and just a little bit more of a finesse in the body posing, because a lot of that got chewed up by the big bulky armor, but turned out pretty well, all in all. The Rattlin priest for DGS was another fun chance to really work on my armor place and getting things smooth, and I feel like I did a really good job getting crisp, sharp edges on armor and stuff. Something I was starting to struggle with more, which is weird because I think it was because I was pumping out so many more miniatures. I didn't have quite as much time as before to really spend tons of time finessing everything when it came to green stuff. But I must have really wanted to get this one right because it just turned out a lot better. The one thing I'm not very pleased with on this sculpt is I had to chop his hands off at the wrist, and I tried a new technique. I believe what I did was I posed the arms, got them all in position, and then I kind of just rested everything there, and then I separately sculpted the hands on, rather than sculpting it all together at once and then chopping it off. The way I did it isn't bad, and if I were to do it now, I would have no problem. It would look fine, but I think that's more just me being a better sculptor and being more aware of my proportions and whatnot. But in this case, I might have even got things started with the fist and then pulled the hammer off of the body, away from the body, and then just sculpted the hands separately, which would probably explain why things look a little bit over large. I don't know, it's probably not as bad as I'm thinking it is, but I just remember having some major struggles with this at the time. Oh, this is also one of the miniatures that was resculpted, and I remember when I first saw the new one, I'm like, oh man, my miniature, they used this one, that's cool, or maybe I resculpted this, and I was pretty happy and excited because I thought it looked really cool, but then I realized it was actually a resculpt by somebody else. Oh well. The Rattlin Male Knight was the third figure in a batch of 3 miniatures that DGS gave me at one time to sculpt, along with the previous 2. And I think this guy turned out well. You can tell, I think you can tell what order I did them in, just because things details are a little more crisp and fine, or refined. I also think that in some ways I did a little bit better on the hands with this one. They might be a little bit better in proportion, and with this particular guy, he actually had two weapon options. You could either give him a 2-handed sword or a 2-handed axe. I much prefer the sword, but man, I did not like having to sculpt 2 sets of hands, because hands were a big challenge for me still at this point. Had to spend a lot of time, and I was rarely happy with them. And so have to do them twice, and not only that, having to line them up, that was a bit of a bummer. But it turned out pretty well. There might be a slight alignment issue on maybe the axe, but all in all, it turned out pretty well. Rusted Heroes was a game/miniatures line created by Steve Petrie from Fantazation Miniatures, one of my favorite online miniature stores. He's got a huge selection of independent miniature lines. So if you're ever looking for anything unique, he still is probably one of the best selections out there. But back in the day, he was like the main guy to get random stuff, especially from Europe. Anyways, so Steve wanted to do his own. He had done a few independent sculpt or individual sculpts for his Fanization webpage, but he wanted to do a game in miniature line. So he approached me, and this was probably the first time I had the chance to basically completely design a miniature from the ground up. It was also the first time that I started doing miniatures completely in Procreate, except for that one anomaly of the Dracula. And as you can see, this is way better looking. It's super clean and fine. You won't see any of those air bubble pits, and I think that's mostly because I had gotten a new pack of putty. I probably learned a few things here and there of how to treat it better, but I love this miniature. You know, Steve gave descriptions. He told me he knew what he wanted for the look of the line, but overall, you know, I got to do some rough concepts for certain elements and things, and what you see here is what I designed and Steve approved. This is still one of my favorite knight miniatures, you know, with heavy armor and stuff. Everything's so clean and crisp, and it just turned out exactly how I wanted it to. The Reaper Dwarf Pathfinder for Warlord, the Sergeant, this is a conversion based off the Grunt, and as you can see, it's more obvious because there was a lot less change about him. They liked the pose and everything, but I ended up modifying his, making his beard look a bit longer, gave him a different weapon. Actually, I think the hand and the axe came from the Minor Sergeant, which I don't quite remember doing at the time, but gave him a cape, just really basic. Unfortunately, I don't have the greens for a lot of these later dwarves. I think because I started to do more conversions and I'd send them back. Reaper's always great. They always send the greens back, but when you do the conversions and do a lot of back and forth, sometimes you'd forget, I'd forget, they'd forget, and so unfortunately those originals are lost to me. Well, if you have good knights, you have to have bad knights. So Rusted Heroes, the second figure I did was for the next faction called the Dragonites. And this is the first grunt miniature for them. Now, again, I don't remember drawing out the concept for this one so much. I'm pretty sure that I kind of concepted on the fly as I went, but obviously had good description from Steve on what to do. I guess I did do the helmet, concepted that first, but everything else was just done on the fly on the miniature, which always causes me stress, but sometimes that's the best way to do it. And technically, I think this miniature came out really well. It looks good, all the details are super sharp, but for me personally, I'm not as happy with his kind of body proportions. I wish that he had a slightly broader shoulders, which maybe it's okay that it's not, just because it sets him apart a little more from the Knights of the Rose miniature, but I really like those bigger, wider, thicker shoulder pads, the pauldrons, on the other one. And this one, I think it was mostly because of the detail of the articulation. I didn't build up enough understructure, and I was worried as I was doing it that it'd be too hard or lose integrity if I put too much on at once, and it ended up being a much more diminutive look. So it's just one of the little regrets you have sometimes when you do a sculpt. You can see with this Elfball Berserker miniature that I did for Tom Anders' company, I was starting to get the itch for doing my own concept art. I went to school for illustration, and I really wanted to draw and sculpt. I liked sculpting, but I liked designing my own characters and illustrating them. And even though this concept isn't perfect by any means, it was a lot of fun to be able to draw and feel like I was more than just a hired wrist to sculpt somebody else's vision. This is what the customer wanted, but I made it look the way I would do it. You know, I drew a concept with details that I thought looked cool, that in my style, really. And so I had a lot of fun with this miniature. He had two separate bits. You could have him with a fist spike or the football. I think the football carrying ended up turning out a little better looking quality wise, but and then it either kind of looks like he's either trying to grab somebody. If he's got the fist spike, grab him and punch him, or if he's got the football, it kind of looks like he's running, pushing guys out of the way. I can't remember what that's called. There's some term. I'm not a sports guy, but as you see, I continued on with the Procreate, and I got a really dynamic pose out of this miniature while still making it a single cast, except for the fact that it had to have bits for the options. But other than that, I just love it when I can do a figure that's basically a one-piece cast that looks like it would probably be multiple pieces. Thanks again for walking down memory lane with me in the first part of the 2008 Sculpting Archives. I'll see you again soon for part 2, but until then, remember, keep sculpting.